Hi, I'm Pete McNaughton, and the 1002nd album you must listen to is Vitalogy by Pearl Jam.
Hi, I'm Jeff Steven, and you're listening to the 1002nd Album Podcast. I spent 10 years going through the 1001 albums you must hear before you die, and now I'm asking people that are important to me all about the albums that are important to them. Enjoy! This is the 1002nd Album Podcast. I'm Jeff Steven, and I'm particularly excited for today's episode. For my guest today, we met a couple decades plus years ago back at University of Western Ontario Medway Hall, and this is a Seinfeld connoisseur, if there ever was one, and also a fantastic playlist maker, went en route to say a Rage Against the Machine concert. Please welcome Pete McNaughton.
Hello there, Jeff.
Nice. So, Pete, the album of choice today is Pearl Jam Vitalogy. And tell me about your Pearl Jam introduction.
Pearl Jam was my band of the 90s, was my band from high school. No one was bigger than Pearl Jam for me. It kind of started out, I was listening to other things at the time, whatever was popular on the radio. My dad had picked up Vitalogy for me as a Christmas present. Which kind of actually came as a bit of a surprise for me because I'd probably mentioned some songs that I'd liked by them, but it could have been a bulk order through Columbia House or something like that. But he had picked up a bunch of albums. Vitalogy was part of the pack. And, I liked the singles initially. I'd already been familiar with Corduroy. Had probably said, "Oh, Dad, I like this song" in the car or something. Or Better Man had been on and mentioned that I liked that too. But it was probably the first album that I felt a bit challenged by too. Like it was a bit darker, edgier. I was also listening to things like Mr. Jones and Sheryl Crow and like whatever else was on the radio, some lighter fare that went down a little easier. So to hear songs like Not For You and Spin the Black Circle, these were, for my grade 8 brain, were a little bit, and I should mention this was November, December 94 when the album came out. So Christmas 94, grade 8. So, I'm still just kind of coming into my own. Music's just starting to kind of have that, you're starting to feel some ownership over some bands and starting to, use those bands as your identity. Like, this is my pack, I like this music. And it wasn't until, so I had got the album, I liked it. Then I kind of went backwards and I picked up 10. I can have a distinct memory of sitting in my bedroom, listening to 10, and hearing Black for the first time. I'd heard Jeremy, I'd heard Even Flow through the radio, but I think it was something about hearing Black for the first time and just the kind of emotional impact of that song just kind of hit. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is unbelievable. Like that was the first time it just kind of hit me in a profound way. And Jeremy was doing the same thing for me, kind of hitting that sort of emotional sweet spot. And then that album I fell in love with. Went from that to Verses, which was, so I'm kind of working backwards and then kind of up. And I think at the time when I heard Verses for the first time, I thought that was the best album I had ever heard. I was just absolutely floored by it. I got so excited. It amped me up so much. Hearing Go, Animal, Daughter, Rearview Mirror, I was just like, this is the best album I've ever heard in my life. So, and then going back, Vitalogy became something that I was growing in appreciation for as I started to love the band.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Nice. I was with you there where I had heard Jeremy long before Vitalogy came out as well. And I can't remember if I ever confessed this to you, but in the interest of full disclosure, I was not a fan.
Is that right? Yeah. Do you remember what particularly you didn't like about it?
It's funny. My folks uncovered a strongly worded letter I had written to Much Music back in the day because I think it was the video I think that turned me away from it. And,
right.
Hell hath no fury like an 11-year-old scorned. So,
yeah.
And I think I was particularly offended that they had banned the video for Baby Got Back that had these, I guess it was some questionable content at the time in the background. But Jeremy was allowed to play, and I just I felt the urge to write to Much Music accordingly. Eventually, it might have been when Daughter came out, or it might have been when I heard Better Man, but eventually I changed my tune, and then ended up quite enjoying all of their 90s output especially. And I think if you look at their catalog in that era, I don't think there's a wrong answer as to which Pearl Jam is a must-hear. But what is it about Vitalogy for you that makes it the choice over a Yield or a Verses or a No Code?
So I could say on any given day I'd be perfectly comfortable also picking verses or yield. But Vitalogy is probably the one I reach back for the most. I think it's when they kind of reach their absolute peak. I feel like this is when everything kind of came together. Kind of marked the time when there was like a dividing line between like the Pearl Jam that sort of made them famous and then the Pearl Jam that was taking on kind of a different sound. You could hear the more live off the floor production. Eddie's voice was changing as well. The classic kind of Herm Jarl Eddie baritone that was sort of more present on the first couple albums, which I loved. And I also feel like it's a little bit kind of over exaggerated how much it sounds like that, even though there's probably a couple songs that, it was a little bit more strained. He's kind of exploring more of the kind of gnarlier edges of his voice to kind of like rough and ragged. You can really kind of hear it like tearing and shredding. I just feel like it was the most raw album that they'd put out up to that point, and I feel like it holds up the best. I also feel like it's got such a varied sounds on it. Everyone thinks of that album as being sort of, it is a really kind of has a dark feel to it. There's a lot of songs on it, like we've got Last Exit, Not For You, Satan's Bed. These are very kind of dark, eerie songs. They've got certain tones and things coming in and out of them. But then those are beside ballads like Nothing Man, Better Man. You've got classic rock sounding like Corduroy. So you got punk kind of songs, Spin the Black Circle, Last Exit, Satan's Bed, Whipping. These are kind of songs almost inspired by like 80s punk. You can just hear all of these different sounds they're trying on, and you can hear them trying to sort of, they can't escape the fact though that they're such a good arena band too, and that these are just like even the punk songs sound like kind of these soaring ballads that you just can't get out of your head. So I just feel like it has the most character. I feel like it's held up the best over the years, even though I feel like a lot of their stuff has. But, songs like Not For You, depending on the day, I feel like that could actually be my favorite Pearl Jam song. Definitely a top 3, but just the way his voice kind of tears apart at the end when he's screaming, "This is not for you." That kind of hits me. Like cranking that in the car just still makes like the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Just amazing. Yeah.
And I said, yeah, absolutely. Not For You is not one to sort of have gently in the background while, completing household tasks.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And it makes me kind of want to like stomp my feet and sort of just like, I cannot, like whenever I have it on, I am singing along, and I've got like I'm full on singing along with it and screaming my head off. Yeah, exactly. It's great.
As you should be, of course.
Yes, but it's like, it's heavy, but in a melodic way, and in a way that sort of, it's not like screaming or anything like that. There's such a tone to Eddie's voice that just makes everything sound, just goes down easy and, just hits in just a real emotional way. I love it.
I like it. And it's funny, those memories that are sort of seared in our brains. And I can picture myself at a cross-country meet in grade 9, and a student saying that when they just got in Vitalogy, maybe just like you, where it was a Christmas gift or a birthday gift or something from around that time. And the student said, it sounds like they didn't really practice their instruments before playing this. And at the time, which I thought was an interesting commentary on the album. Maybe not a pitchfork review or something like that.
At a cross-country meet, he said this too. I like yes.
The detail there. But it's funny because at the time I was speechless because I hadn't heard it yet. But with the gift of hindsight, what should 14-year-old me have maybe said at the time that might actually be a good thing?
I would have said maybe like a really big grade. So we're talking grade 9. I would say maybe like a chest noogie followed by a wedgie would be the way to. No. First of all, who is this guy? Like Leonard Bernstein of the he's the all master of like what instruments and the tunings and stuff. Okay, so I was actually listening to Rick Rubin and Malcolm Gladwell on their podcast talk about Rick Rubin's new book, and Rick Rubin made a comment where he said, it's not perfection we're looking for in music, it's emotion. And I just feel like that perfectly encapsulates maybe what this album is. Like, first of all, I wouldn't hear that. I don't know how he must be some sort of musical savant to be like, oh, that's a little bit. But I feel like those imperfections are like what make music feel alive, and things that kind of excite you. And it's those kind of mistakes sometimes that end up being some of your favorite moments in songs. There's lots of examples of that happening in the past, like in music, like whether it's like the creep with the guitar that kind of chimes in, where Johnny Greenwood, that was sort of like something he was doing to sabotage the song at the time, and ended up they kept it in because it sounded amazing. Or Kurt Cobain's kind of false start where he comes in and says Polly said during Polly. To that I would say I don't really know what he's talking about exactly, but at the same time I feel like what he's hearing is just a more live off the floor, stripped down production, but I also feel like that's exactly what makes it awesome. So
I like it.
Yes.
And I like that. We're not looking for perfection, but emotion, and the emotion was definitely on display here.
Absolutely. Just like Eddie's voice shredding in some of those songs, and you could just feel it kind of coming apart, like in Last Exit, just like when he's saying "Let My Spirit Pass," and he's just like, it's just so awesome. Like, it's still whenever I hear it, I can't believe how great it sounds. It's so exciting to hear someone laying it on the floor. There's such conviction in his voice, and I don't know, the whole band is just, I love the production on it though. Everything kind of hits nice and clean too, like the drums really like punch through and punctuate the songs so well. Just the slashing guitars, it's great. I love it.
No, and I'm thrilled you chose this, because I really do think it's a fascinating album. In that the journey, like you mentioned, the journey they go through, where it's punk, it's more polished, it's ballads, it's just completely ragged and everywhere in between. And probably that stark contrast is never more visible than on tracks 8 and 9.
Right.
So track 8, Corduroy, which you mentioned earlier on, so that sort of classic rock feel, like wouldn't be out of place with a Neil Young type record. And without any sort of hyperbole, it might be, my 8th favorite song by anyone of all time. It's just that good of a song.
Absolutely.
And then its follow-up track in the running order is a tune called Bugs.
Right.
Which is maybe is more of an endurance test of a tune in that case.
Yeah.
And so I suppose I'm genuinely curious as to your thoughts on that sort of really stark contrast. And then do you actually go back to Bugs every time you listen to Vitalogy?
When I have the album on and I'm listening to it straight through, I don't skip Bugs at all. I actually, to tell you the truth, obviously I don't think there's anyone when I'm listening to that song that is thinking to themselves they were trying to write like a great song there. But however, as far as a piece, as part of a whole album goes, it sits nicely. There's some, probably some metaphors or some things you could derive from what he was kind of getting at, what he's singing about. But I think it's kind of funny. It kind of shows the side of their personality. I think it just adds to the character of the album. They had a lot of those sort of interludes on the album as well. Pry 2, which leads into Corduroy, is just Eddie spelling out privacy, Privacy. And then I, Devanita, that fades into Immortality, track 12. Bugs is hilarious. I find it just funny, just sitting there with the organ. And I think from a grade 8 standpoint, like, I think a lot of these songs, because I did hear them at, such a, like adolescence being such an emotional time in your life, you just hold all these songs pretty dear. Even when they're not the greatest, you just have like fond memories of hearing them. I thought it was funny when I was in grade 8, grade 9, hearing that song. And even as an adult, I still enjoy it. And I'll be like singing along when I hear that song as well. So yeah, definitely still let it play through.
Nice. Yeah. It's funny. And I think that's the approach I'll go to the next time I listen to it, where they're not looking to write the next song for the Great American Songbook. It's like, because I think my befuddlement came from like, how could they write a song as great as this, but as inaccessible as this? But it's because that's just what they did.
That's what exactly. And I just feel like it's part of a whole album feel, and I don't know, it's what also gives the album character. I think if there was just 12 tracks that were like kind of structured like Corduroy, that were tight versed and chorus, and I feel like that the album wouldn't necessarily have that same personality, but I feel like that's what makes it so good to revisit, because there's all these quirky, weird little things happening. the whips at the beginning of Satan's Bed, or like I said, those segues that go into some of the bigger songs. Yeah, I just feel like it all adds.
For sure.
Yeah.
So it's one thing to have the studio album experience, but you've also had the privilege of seeing them.
Yeah.
And if my memory is correct, it was actually at Wrigley Field in Chicago as well.
That's correct.
And did they play any of these tracks at the gig?
They did. So that day it was raining, and the forecast was thunderstorms, and Wrigley's outdoors. So we were super nervous all day whether the show was even going to happen. We're like, oh my gosh, we come all the way up here. We just want to enjoy ourselves. And just the idea. So we were waiting and waiting. It was an hour delayed. Weren't sure if they were going on. They were kind of giving us updates, but everything was sort of touch and go. We're waiting for the storm to pass, which we were kind of hopeful that it was going to. But then all of a sudden we started hearing Ida Venida, which is this track number 12, just the said jam where they just repeat that song over it, started playing over the speakers. And we got so excited. They came out and played, I can't remember every Vitalogy song the ones, but Last Exit was maybe song 2 or song 3 in the set. They played Corduroy, Better Man, of course, which they probably play at every show. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they probably played about 4 or 5 tracks from it. But Last Exit, Corduroy. Corduroy has become almost this big communal moment at shows. And Eddie's almost turned it into like there's the couple moments in it where he gets the crowd kind of chanting back these almost like vocal gymnastics, calisthenics routine. I don't know. He does the whole thing where he does sort of has the crowd calling back after him. He says a line and asks, it's like a call and response from the crowd, which is awesome. And he did at that show as well. So yeah, nice. It was an amazing show.
I can only imagine. Yeah. That's fun. And I like to always do the sort of the summary, the catch-all, the thesis of why is this the 1,000-second album that one must hear? So
I think Pearl Jam to me, and I know this would be highly contested, but I think they are the best American band. I'm going to say they're the best American band that's ever lived. They're my first favorite band, and I would still consider them my favorite band. But I would say you wouldn't get a lot of pushback in saying that they were the band of the 90s too. I think a lot of people would maybe agree that they were one of the top bands, and I think this is their best moment. An album like 10, I know always gets sort of, because it was their debut and it's got an amazing catalog of tracks on it. I can see why that song is always included in top 100 lists or, Rolling Stone's top 500. But I think that even critics and fans alike would say that Vitalogy is their best moment. Like I said earlier, I think it's kind of the most kind of raw and powerful they've been. It's got such a collection of songs, like just going through them, like you've got Better Man, Corduroy, Last Exit. Not For You might be my favorite song. Corduroy, definitely. I know you were saying that is your favorite, and I on any given day, that's my favorite as well. But just there's so many great songs on here, so much variety, and you've got the best band with their best album. And I just feel like it's got to be I think it should have been on the 1,001 list. I was surprised to see that it wasn't. I absolutely, for all those reasons and more, think that it's well deserving. I'm sure a lot of people have heard it. I did want to almost go with another album to maybe promote a band that I feel like is underrepresented. Someone like a Spoon. I don't know if have you ever listened to Spoon?
The Gaga.
Yeah. Which that album you could pick, and there's a couple other by them that I think are absolutely albums you must hear before you die. But this album just has such an emotional connection to me because it was the first album that sort of led me on my road to my love for Pearl Jam, and it was all about Pearl Jam musically for me. Everything else was sort of secondary. I feel like they're responsible, and this album's responsible for kind of taking me on my whole musical exploration through the years. So.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of irrefutable if it's the best band at their best moment with the best songs.
That's it. Exactly. Simple as that. And I'm right and anybody is wrong that disagrees with me. No.
Is the takeaway.
Yeah, exactly.
And to bolster your argument as well, I think it might have one of the best CD packagings from the 90s as well, with the sort of, it was an incongruous size with the rest of the catalog.
I know. I remember just like leafing through that and just being It's almost looks like a medical booklet. Yeah, there's kind of like fragments of lyrics, but then there's also just some. It's dark. It's weird. Very much like the album. So the packaging's great. Still holds up. There was a lot of strain around the album at the time. I think the band was a lot of infighting. They were kind of dealing with the tortures of fame, which is sort of like a bit cliche and sort of played out. But at the same time, I feel like that really kind of came through in the music. And grade 8, you're hearing that kind of music for the first time. It's just the right album at the right time sort of thing.
I like it.
Yeah.
And it's as a fellow guitar enthusiast as well, I liked how in Better Man, that was probably for most of us the experience of putting the thumb over to do the F sharp at the Better Man too. So to try and expand us as guitar players as well.
That's it. Yeah, there you go.
But no, that's great because the 1001 list had included 10, but I'm glad that now this is getting the recognition it deserves as an option for the 1002nd.
Absolutely.
So that's good. Great. But a huge thank you for coming today, Pete, and until the next time.
Thank you very much.
This has been the 1002nd Album Podcast. Thanks for sharing some of your time, energy, and attention with us today. Take care.